Samantha had never been the type to chase money. She believed in love, in long walks by the river, in handwritten notes slipped into lunchboxes. When Daniel came into her life, he didn't have much, just a crooked smile, a pile of law books, and a dream so big it nearly swallowed them both. And she loved him for it. They married young, in a small church with peeling paint on the windows and daisies tied together in place of expensive roses. Samantha wore a dress she had stitched herself on an old sewing machine, and Daniel promised her forever with a ring that cost less than the shoes he wore. To them it wasn't about wealth. It was about the life they would build together. In those early years, Samantha worked double shifts at the diner on Main Street. The kind of place with cracked vinyl booths, greasy menus, and regulars who came more for her warm smile than the coffee that never quite tasted right. She'd pin her hair back under a paper cap, refill cups without complaint, and tuck away her tips, dollars and quarters, into a jar labeled dreams. Because Samantha had a dream too. She wanted her own bakery. A place that smelled like butter and cinnamon the moment you stepped inside. A place where neighbors would gather, where children pressed their noses to glass cases filled with pastries that looked like art. She pictured walls painted in soft cream, sunlight streaming through lace curtains, and the pride of knowing it was hers. But dreams didn't pay tuition. Daniel was in law school and tuition bills came faster than she could count. So Samantha worked, day after day, night after night. When her feet ached, when her eyes burned, she told herself it was worth it. Because Daniel believed in something bigger and she believed in him. First he was grateful. He'd stay up late in their small apartment, surrounded by books, and tell her she was his angel, his lifeline. "When I'm a lawyer," he'd whisper against her tired shoulders, "you'll never have to work another day. I'll give you everything you've ever wanted." And she believed him. But slowly something shifted. The more Daniel succeeded, the closer he got to his degree, to his shiny internships at prestigious firms, the more distant he became. The man who once studied by her side now came home late, smelling of expensive cologne she hadn't bought him. He spoke less of their future and more of his. When Samantha tried to share her own dreams, his smile turned sharp. "A bakery?" he scoffed one evening, flipping through case briefs at the kitchen table. "Samantha, that's not ambition. That's a hobby. You think kneading dough will pay bills? That's not a business, it's playtime." Her heart sank, but she laughed it off, telling herself he was tired, that stress made him cruel. Still, she stopped talking about her dream. The jar labeled dreams remained on the shelf, gathering dust. By the time Daniel graduated, the man who had promised her forever had transformed. His suits were tailored now, his shoes gleamed, his smile was sharper, colder. He had stepped into a world of power lunches and rooftop cocktail parties, where Samantha's diner uniform became an embarrassment he didn't bother to hide. At a dinner party one night, she caught him rolling his eyes as she mentioned trying a new pie recipe. "She loves baking," he told his colleagues, his tone dripping with condescension. "She still thinks about opening a bakery, can you imagine? My wife, a small-town baker." The table laughed. Samantha forced a smile, though her stomach twisted. But the cruelest blow came months later. Daniel had been spending more time away, blaming work, blaming clients. Samantha, ever trusting, believed him, until one afternoon when she found a receipt tucked into his jacket pocket. Dinner for two. At a restaurant she could never afford. A bottle of wine that cost more than her entire week's paycheck. When she confronted him, his mask finally cracked. "You don't understand, Samantha," he snapped. "You're holding me back. I can't keep living like this. With your small-minded ideas, your diner job, your obsession with pastries. I need someone who fits my future." Tears stung her eyes. "Your future? Daniel, I gave up everything for you. I worked, I sacrificed, I believed in you when no one else did. And now I'm not enough." He didn't flinch. "You'll never be enough. Not for the life I'm building." And then he delivered the final blow. There was another woman. A socialite. Wealthy, connected, polished in all the ways Samantha wasn't. She went to charity galas and wore gowns that shimmered under chandeliers. She was, Daniel said, the kind of wife a man of his stature deserved. Within weeks, Samantha found herself standing outside their apartment, clutching a single suitcase while Daniel walked away without looking back. Her heart was shattered, but worse was the humiliation. He told friends she had no ambition, that she was just a waitress. He paraded his new wife through the same streets Samantha had once walked with him, mocking her dreams at every opportunity. In the quiet of her empty apartment, Samantha cried until she could cry no more. Then one morning she walked back into the diner, tied on her apron, and went to work. Because what else could she do? Her marriage was gone. Her dignity was bruised. And the man she had built her life around had abandoned her like a coat gone out of fashion. But somewhere deep inside, under the ache and the shame, a spark remained. He had called her small. He had called her unworthy. He had told her she would never amount to anything more than a waitress. Samantha tucked those words away, not as wounds but as fuel. One day she promised herself. One day she would prove him wrong. When Daniel walked out of her life, Samantha thought the worst pain would be the sound of the door closing. She thought it would be the loneliness of waking up alone, of reaching across the bed to find only cold sheets. He was wrong. The real pain came in the days that followed, when the whispers began. The diner was small and news traveled fast. Customers who once smiled warmly now offered pitying looks. Friends who had sat at her kitchen table sipping coffee with her and Daniel suddenly crossed their arms, repeating Daniel's words like gospel. She'll never be more than a waitress. She's not built for his world. She should have known better. Samantha smiled through it, balancing plates of pancakes and refilling coffee cups as if her world hadn't collapsed. But inside she was unraveling. Nights were the worst. She would sit in the tiny one-bedroom apartment she had rented after leaving their home, staring at the walls that seemed too close, too quiet. The apartment smelled faintly of old paint and loneliness, its thin carpet worn by countless strangers before her. She had traded a shared life for a box barely big enough to hold her grief. There were no family members to lean on. Her parents had passed years earlier and she had no siblings. The only people she might have called family were the friends she and Daniel once shared, but most had chosen him. After all, he was the one with promise, the one with money, the one whose success they wanted to bask in. The few who stayed, Lisa from the diner, an older waitress named Marcy, tried to cheer her up, but even their kindness felt heavy. They reminded her of the life she used to have, of the people she used to know. And sometimes their words were salt in wounds that hadn't yet scabbed. "You'll bounce back," Lisa said once, squeezing her hand across the diner counter. "You're stronger than this." But Samantha didn't feel strong. She felt hollow. Depression came quietly like fog rolling in. Some mornings she couldn't bring herself to get out of bed. The alarm would buzz, the light would creep in through the blinds, but she stayed still, staring at the ceiling as though moving would break her entirely. Food lost its taste. Sleep offered no rest. Her laughter, once easy, once warm, was a stranger she barely remembered. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in the mirror. Pale skin, sunken eyes, hair tangled from days of neglect. She would whisper, "Who are you?" But the woman staring back never answered. Worse than her own thoughts were Daniel's lingering shadows. His words replayed at night, echoing through the silence of her small apartment. "You'll never be enough. You're just a waitress. You're small-minded. You'll never make it." And the cruelest part? A piece of her started to believe it. For weeks she moved through life like a ghost. She tied her apron at the diner, served regulars with polite smiles, and came home to an apartment that felt more like a cage. The jar labeled Dreams sat on her shelf, but she couldn't bear to look at it. It was covered in dust, mocking her with its emptiness. Sometimes when she passed by bakery windows on her walk home, she would pause, her breath catching at the smell of fresh bread. She'd see other women laughing behind the counters, their aprons dusted with flour, their faces glowing with pride. And then she would turn away quickly, ashamed of the envy burning in her chest. Weeks turned to months, and still she drifted, trapped between who she had been and who she might become. But grief, like all storms, eventually begins to clear. It happens slowly, in moments so small she almost missed them. One night, as she sat at her kitchen table staring at a wilted plant, she realized she was tired of sadness. Not healed, not ready, but tired. The kind of tired that made her ache for something more than pain. Another time, Marcy from the diner dragged her out to a farmer's market. Samantha wandered between stalls, barely present, until she stopped at one selling homemade bread. She touched the crust gently, inhaling the scent of rosemary and butter. For the first time in months, her heart gave a little flutter. And one evening, alone in her apartment, she found herself pulling out her mother's old recipe book. She hadn't touched it since before the divorce. The pages were stained with vanilla and chocolate, her mother's handwriting looping across the margins. As Samantha traced the ink with her fingertip, tears welled in her eyes. But this time they weren't only from grief. There was comfort there. Memory. A whisper of who she had been before Daniel told her she was nothing. He baked that night. Just a simple batch of cookies, using the chipped oven in her tiny kitchen. The smell filled the apartment, chasing away the stale air of despair. When she bit into one warm and sweet, something inside her stirred. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. But it was hope. That night she pulled the jar labeled Dreams from the shelf, wiped the dust from its glass and set it in the middle of the table. It was still empty, but it no longer felt mocking. Felt like a challenge. Samantha sat for hours thinking. About the life she had lost. About the love that had broken her. About the future Daniel had tried to steal from her. And for the first time since the betrayal she whispered words that felt real, words that tasted like fire on her tongue. He doesn't get to decide who I am. The next morning she tied her apron at the diner as usual. She smiled at customers, poured coffee, cleared plates. But this time she felt something different beneath her skin. A spark, faint but steady. When her shift ended she didn't go straight home. Instead she stopped by the library. He checked out books on small businesses, on baking, on entrepreneurship. She carried them home like treasures, setting them beside the jar. Her hands trembled as she flipped open the first page, but her heart was steady. For the first time since Daniel had walked out, Samantha wasn't just surviving. He was preparing. Because if Daniel had taken everything from her she would rebuild. Not for him, not to prove him wrong, but for herself. The jar labeled Dreams would not sit empty forever. And Samantha was ready to fill it. Samantha's days still began at the diner. The clang of the bell above the door, the hiss of the coffee machine, the chatter of morning regulars. It was routine, safe, and for now necessary. But nights were different. When her shift ended she would carry a sack of groceries back to her small apartment. Not extravagant things, just flour, sugar, eggs, butter. She'd set them carefully on her chipped counter, push aside the bills she couldn't yet pay, and tie her hair back with determination. The kitchen became her sanctuary. The old oven that once felt like a prison now felt like freedom. She tested recipes into the early hours, scribbling notes in her mother's stained cookbook. Some nights the air was filled with the scent of burnt dough and disappointment. Other nights she pulled from the oven something so good it made her cry. Not because it was perfect but because it was hers. At first it was just practice. Just healing. But slowly the jar labeled Dreams began to fill again. A few crumpled bills, a handful of coins at the end of every week. She sacrificed new shoes, dinners out, even heat in the winter sometimes. Everything extra went into that jar. For nearly 2 years this was her rhythm. Work by day. Bake by night. Save in between. Then one spring morning she took the leap. With her savings she rented a narrow shopfront on the corner of a quiet street. The paint peeled from its bricks, the windows were streaked with grime, and the rent was low enough to make her question the landlord twice. But when she walked inside she felt it. This was where her dream would begin. She named it Sweet Haven. The first weeks were brutal. She rose at 4 a.m. to prepare bread and pastries, worked the counter herself, and returned home only to collapse for a few hours before doing it all again. Customers trickled in slowly at first, some out of curiosity, others out of pity. But Samantha's baking spoke for itself. Word spread quietly then quickly. Have you tried the croissants at that new place? She makes pies like my grandmother used to. That woman has magic in her hands. Soon Sweet Haven was never empty. The aroma of butter and cinnamon spilled into the street, drawing strangers who became regulars. Samantha was tired, always tired, but she glowed in a way she hadn't in years. And then one afternoon everything changed. A tall man in a tailored suit walked in alone. He wasn't the usual type. No office workers rushing for coffee, no mothers buying muffins for children. He studied the glass case with a thoughtful expression, then ordered a simple almond tart. Samantha boxed it for him, her flour-dusted hands betraying her exhaustion. First time here? She asked, forcing a polite smile. He nodded. A friend recommended it. Said it was unforgettable. He ate at one of the small tables and when he finished he didn't leave. Instead he asked for another. Then another. By the third Samantha laughed nervously. They can't be that good, she said, brushing a stray curl from her face. But the man shook his head, eyes steady. No. They're better. His name was Michael Bennett. She learned that only later when he returned the next day and the next after that. At first she thought he was just another loyal customer. But Michael was more. Much more. He was a wealthy entrepreneur, the kind whose name appeared in business magazines, the kind people whispered about with admiration. But Samantha didn't see that right away. She saw the way he watched her bake, the way he asked about her recipes, the way he listened, truly listened when she talked about her dreams. "You've built all this by yourself?" he asked one evening after she had closed the shop but allowed him to linger. "Yes," she said softly, wiping down the counter. "It's small but it's mine." Michael leaned against the counter, studying her with quiet intensity. "Small doesn't mean insignificant. I see more vision in this little shop than in half the boardrooms I've sat in." His words warmed something deep inside her, something Daniel had once buried under ridicule. Weeks turned into months and Michael became more than a customer. He became a partner. First in business when he offered to invest in expanding Sweet Haven, then in life as their long conversations turned into dinners and dinners into something more. Together they transformed Sweet Haven from a small corner bakery into an empire. With Michael's resources and Samantha's artistry, they opened locations across the city, each one echoing her original vision, warm, inviting, filled with the scent of fresh bread and laughter. Critics hailed her as a visionary. Customers adored her. And Michael? He adored her most of all. 2 years after opening her first shop, Samantha was no longer the waitress Daniel mocked. She was the co-founder of the country's fastest-growing bakery empire. She stood proudly beside her husband, a man who valued her not for the image she projected but for the soul she carried. Her laughter returned, fuller than ever. The woman who once cried into her pillow now walked red carpets, her name celebrated, her work admired. But Samantha never forgot the woman she had been, the one in the tiny apartment whispering promises to herself through tears. And she never forgot Daniel. She didn't seek him out. He didn't need to. Fate, it seemed, had its own plans. Because one evening she and Michael received an invitation. A grand gala hosted in the heart of the city. A gathering of the elite, the kind Daniel had once said she'd never belong to. Samantha hesitated when she saw the guest list. His name was there. Daniel. She closed the invitation, her hand steady, her heart calm. Because this time she wasn't the one with something to prove. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, each crystal catching the light like frozen stars. Silk gowns rustled against marble floors, and laughter rose in waves from the city's elite. Waiters glided between golden tables with trays of champagne, their movements rehearsed like ballet. It was the kind of night Daniel lived for, a night where power wasn't spoken but displayed, where alliances were forged over clinking glasses and carefully rehearsed smiles. He entered the room with his new wife, Cassandra, on his arm. She was everything Samantha had not been, or so he liked to tell himself. Elegant, refined, perfectly polished in diamonds that shimmered under the chandeliers. Daniel's chest swelled as heads turned. He belonged here. No more than belonged, he ruled here. This was his world, and tonight he intended to make it known. "Darling," Cassandra whispered, squeezing his arm. "This gala is bigger than I imagined. Mr. Bennett doesn't host often, does he?" "No," Daniel replied with smug satisfaction. "Bennett is notoriously private. But when he does host, it's because something monumental is happening. Being here means we're in his circle. That's what matters." They swept across the room, Daniel shaking hands, dropping names, boasting subtly about cases won and deals closed. He was in his element, until the evening's program began. A hush fell as the MC took the stage, announcing the night's highlight, the unveiling of a new luxury dessert line, a collaboration between Bennett's investment firm and a culinary visionary whose name, the MC promised, was already reshaping the industry. Daniel leaned forward, his interest piqued. A dessert line? Odd choice for such a grand occasion. Still, if Bennett was backing it, it was bound to be extraordinary. Then the lights shifted. From the shadows of the stage, a woman emerged. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, simple yet commanding, its color rich against her skin. Her hair fell in loose waves, her posture straight, her steps measured. She moved not with the hesitation of someone entering foreign territory, but with the quiet confidence of someone stepping into her rightful place. And when Daniel's eyes found her face, his glass nearly slipped from his hand. For a moment he thought it was an illusion. A cruel trick of memory. But then the whispers began. That's her. The co-founder of Sweet Haven. She's the genius behind those bakeries. People wait hours just for her pastries. His heart hammered. Oh, it couldn't be. The MC's voice rang out. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Samantha Bennett, co-founder and creative force behind Sweet Haven. The applause thundered through the ballroom. Daniel's throat went dry. He glanced at Cassandra, who was clapping politely, unaware of the storm tearing through him. On stage, Samantha smiled, poised and luminous. Her eyes swept the crowd, landing for the briefest moment on Daniel. And in that instant he felt it, not anger, not longing, but something far worse. Indifference. She didn't hate him. He didn't care. Daniel's jaw tightened. He straightened, trying to sneer, to cloak his rising panic in disdain. So, he muttered to Cassandra, she finally learned to bake something worth selling. But even he heard the hollowness in his words. Samantha began to speak. Her voice carried across the room, warm yet steady. She spoke of beginnings, of late nights spent perfecting recipes, of a dream that started in a kitchen no bigger than a closet. She spoke of Sweet Haven not just as a business, but as a vision. A place of comfort, of joy, of community. The crowd leaned in, captivated. And then Michael Bennett joined her on stage, placing a hand gently at the small of her back. He smiled, not the smile of a business partner flaunting an asset, but of a man honoring his equal. To my wife, Michael said, lifting a glass, and to the woman whose vision built an empire. Sweet Haven would not exist without her brilliance, her passion, her relentless spirit. She is the heart of it all. The room erupted in applause. Daniel's chest burned. Wife. The word sliced deeper than any insult. He watched as Michael kissed her temple, watched as the cameras flashed, capturing Samantha bathed in light while he shrank into the shadows. Still, his pride pushed him forward. After the program, during the mingling, he approached her. Samantha, he said, forcing a smirk as though the sight of her hadn't gutted him. It's been a long time. She turned, her expression serene. Daniel, you've certainly come up in the world, he said, trying for charm, though his voice betrayed the strain. A bakery empire, is it? Who would have thought? Her smile was soft, almost kind. I suppose you were right, she said. I'll always be a waitress. Only now, Daniel. She gestured around the glittering hall at the waiters carrying trays of her creations. I own the restaurant. Laughter rippled through the nearby guests, sharp and merciless. Daniel's face flushed crimson. Samantha didn't linger. She excused herself gracefully, slipping her hand into Michael's as they moved away. The sight of her leaving, radiant at her husband's side, shattered whatever scraps of dignity Daniel had left. The whispers swelled behind him. She's remarkable. He left that. Imagine trading her for Cassandra. Daniel tried to drown them out, but they clung to him, each word a chain dragging him under. Cassandra's voice cut through, sharp and embarrassed. Daniel, what on earth was that? You know her. He couldn't answer. Not with his throat locked and his pride in tatters. Because the truth was inescapable. He had mocked her, humiliated her, discarded her as worthless. And yet here she was, the woman he had belittled, standing as an icon, adored, respected, loved beyond measure. And he was nothing more than the ghost of her past, remembered not with hatred but with indifference. That was the cruelest punishment of all. Samantha never raised her voice. She didn't gloat, didn't demand retribution. She didn't need to. Her life, her joy, her success, they were the revenge. She had taken the ashes he left her in and built a kingdom. And in that kingdom Daniel had no place. If you believed Samantha deserved this ending, then like and subscribe for more powerful stories like hers, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder. Sometimes the best revenge is simply thriving.